Hi there, everyone. This is Jessica Schaub, also known as Jessica Mystic, and I'm here interviewing Andrew Basiago, who has physically teleported to Mars and also to the past, to the Battle of Gettysburg, and the future, 2013. I met him at James Gilliland's ranch. We were both speakers and presenters, and so I'm very pleased to have you all meet Andrew Basiago.
I appreciate that.
So we have so much to talk about. Where do we start?
Well, I was thinking today that we could talk about the fact that my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, which I published in 2008, which is the first work of science or literature to prove that Mars is an inhabited planet, has a very interesting provenance. In fact, there are data points that relate to the paper that go back to my childhood and the involvement of my late father, Raymond Francis Basiago, who was an aerospace engineer and an electrical engineer who worked for the Ralph M. Parsons Company, but also did work for the U.S. Defense Department, to include the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy. And as a result of our project experiences on DARPA's Project Pegasus, there is a linkage, a very profound linkage, that the public deserves to know about the recent discoveries of life on Mars that I've made and information that was in the possession of the U.S. government even 40 years ago, not just establishing that Mars is an inhabited planet, but that 40 years hence I would play a role in developing human understanding about that fact. So let me just explain the different incidents in my childhood that link to my discovery of life on Mars just recently in my late 40s. The first incident that I can remember occurred around 1967 or 68. I was about 6 years old. I had been born in September of 1961, so I'm just estimating based on how old I was when this particular event occurred. What happened was my dad was working at that time for a subsidiary of the Ralph M. Parsons Company called Parsons-Jordan Corporation. And the research that I've done over the last 10 years into my experiences on Project Pegasus and my late father's and that of others who were attached to the project showed that Parsons-Jordan was a company that was created by Parsons to really implement one contract, which was a copper contract that it had with an engineering project involving copper development that Anaconda Corporation was doing in South and Central America, most especially Chile. But my research showed that it was being used as a cover for U.S. time-space research, namely the development of time travel technology on behalf of the U.S. Defense Department, which is in fact what the entire thrust of Project Pegasus was. And so I was enrolled in a public grammar school in New Jersey, not far from my home, and just living during my conventional life in New Jersey, a fairly happy and conventional childhood, growing up in a post-war suburb. I was the youngest of 5 children. And one particular evening after dinner, we had eaten dinner, but my dad was delayed in coming home. Frequently we ate dinner with my father. And he came home around 7 or 7:30 that night, and he had been drinking with some of his friends from work. And so he was slightly inebriated. It was as if he had had several drinks. My father was certainly not an alcoholic, quite the contrary. He was a very, very responsible and disciplined man. But like many people, including myself, occasionally he would enjoy taking drinks socially with colleagues or at some special event. And this was one of those incidents. And so he was in a festive mood, a playful mood, and somewhat of a disinhibited mood. And after he ate, he gathered us around and he said, children, join me in the living room. I have something very funny to share with you. And he said, this is what this guy has written about the first discovery of life on Mars. And he was reading it as if it was maybe a comedic essay or opinion editorial out of a newspaper or something like that, kind of a Swiftian essay in which the conceit of this work of literature was that somebody was describing for the first time life on Mars. And what he was reading, I now realize, because I've written the paper, was a summary of some of the most fanciful, even farcical passages from my 2008 paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars. Now, this was 40 years before the paper was written. And he found, it's clear to me that the passages that were taken from the paper in this particular incident seemingly must have been passed along to my father to deceive him or to only partially inform him about what's in my paper. I mean, I wrote the paper in a way in which I would prove that Mars is inhabited, and I would write a solid work of natural history that would contain as much evidence as I could to prove my major premises of the paper. But in some portions of the paper I wrote, for example, when I was naming life forms, or I was describing some of the ground drawings that are found in NASA image PIA 10214, which was taken from the westward, from the western edge of the home plate plateau, looking westward in late 2007, and then posted on the World Wide Web in 2008. So in some portions of my paper, I wrote in a Swiftian way. So, for example, people would enjoy reading the paper, but also that, for example, so that children could identify with the life forms and the fact that Mars is inhabited, and that's something that we shouldn't be afraid about. But in fact, we should engage as a remarkable new discovery of the way our cosmos actually is. And so my dad was reading these passages and becoming hysterical. And he read, I would say, for about 15 minutes, and my mom ultimately asked him to stop. She said, "Ray, you have to stop. He was just laughing too hard." And she was worried that, he was. And so right as he concluded reading these passages and almost falling out of his chair laughing, and it was very funny, we were laughing with him, I ran over to where he was. And even though I was a very well-behaved child, a very obedient, and socially appropriate child, I grabbed the file out of my dad's hand that he'd been reading from. It was a manila file, and I opened it up, and on the top of the paper it said Central Intelligence Agency. And then there was a caption where I saw my name, and I saw something that read something like Passages from the Discovery of Life on Mars, 2008. And my father suddenly grew very stern. He was not only inebriated, but he'd been essentially laughing substantially, quite vigorously. And he grew very serious, and he said, "You don't do that." And he snatched it back from me. But I remember that incident because I realized that he wasn't reading something out of the Sunday newspaper that a colleague had passed along to him. He was reading a kind of a bowdlerized synopsis of very limited passages from my 2008 paper. I think I could probably go into the paper tonight and identify what passages they are. They were the passages that were the most Swiftian, that were the most fanciful. So that was the first data point in which the quantum access capabilities of the U.S. government entered my reality in the context of Mars, and showed me that 40 years before I wrote my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, the U.S. government had it. It had it because it was already sending personnel forward in time via Tesla-based teleportation technology that both my father and I would become substantially involved in as team members in Project Pegasus. He as an engineer for Parsons, who had reporting requirements to the Central Intelligence Agency. And in fact, during my investigation of my experiences in Pegasus, I was consulting through an historian, a university academic, to the CIA and the Office of Naval Intelligence. And when we explored my father's background for the intelligence agency per se, not just as a Defense Department engineer,